Tonight we're going to be looking at a lesson on Genesis 39, Lessons for Living. And this one, I'm going to attempt two things. Since we have the dinner in honor of our three young men who are graduating tonight, I'm going to focus out of this chapter on things that are really pertinent to young people. But as you know, as you deal with things in the Bible, if it pertains to young people, it's still going to be a lesson whenever you get older. And so it'll be value to all, but I think it's some things out of this chapter, I hope, that will be encouraging to them and maybe an exhortation that you're beginning a new time in life. Watch out. But it's a good thing. And then secondly, Lana always warns me, don't do this. I'm going to try to have a briefer than usual lesson. She says every time I do that, it ends up longer. So we're going to see if her theory is valid or not. Because I'm not just telling her, I'm telling everybody. So we'll see how that works. Anyway, in Genesis 39, we of course see here, this is Joseph. Joseph is in Egypt. He's in Potiphar's house. And things are not going to go well. Things are going to fall apart in that house as Potiphar's wife spreads some lies about him because he will not give in to her temptations. And he ends up imprisoned as the chapter ends. Now, as you look at that, one of the things that comes out, and this is something that we all need to know. My son is very well aware of the fact that I used to tell him life isn't fair. And he didn't like that, but now he tells his children that. But you look, and the sad reality of life is it is not fair. And even at times, those that you should be able to rely upon, they'll turn against you. Jesus warned in Matthew the 10th chapter that sometimes the enemies are those of your own household, and Joseph knew that very well. As the chapter opens, Joseph was brought down to Egypt. The reason he's brought down to Egypt is because his brothers betrayed and sold him into captivity because they were jealous of him. But anyway, he ends up in Potiphar. Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, brought him at the hands of the Israelites, which brought him down thither. And so life isn't fair. And Joseph learned that lesson very well. Here's a young man, and by all estimations, he was about 17 years old, around there, whenever he was sold. And so, very young man, but he's learning some lessons that are very, very vital in days to come, that you need to be wary. You're not always suspicious. You don't get to where you don't have any trust of anybody, but you be aware that bad things can happen to good people. But what you can't do, you can't control what others will do, and so you need to be very careful. Joseph couldn't make a choice as to which family he was in, and you and I can't do that either. But the temptations, the struggles, the unfairness that comes from people round about, sometimes they come because of who we do choose. In other words, we need to be very careful to surround ourselves with people who are not going to drag us down. So many times I've sadly been on the losing end of that myself. I've been drawn into things when I was younger in which I wouldn't have been involved in if I hadn't have been with those people. But then as I became a Christian and I began to try and help others, I really couldn't tell you the number of times that I have talked with people. They've come and sought counsel, sought help, and they have fallen into things, and it comes to find out was because of who they were with, the companions they chose. 1 Corinthians 15, there was a terrible thing that came upon the children of God, a rejection of the resurrection. The truth of the resurrection was being spread amongst them. And Paul, by inspiration, told them that evil companionship, in other words, those about you, these things can corrupt you. We know the danger that is there. In Proverbs 25 and verse 19, we find that confidence in an unfaithful man in time of trouble is like a foot out of joint, a tooth out of joint. In other words, it's something that is always there, a trouble to you, something that's going to pull you down and distract you from what is good and right and proper. And so one of the things that I exhort people to do is to make wise choices. You know, you look, and our young men who are going out tonight, you know, they're graduating. They're going to be involved in various areas, whatever school it is or what boot camp they end up in. You'll know more about that later. But wherever they end up, they're going to realize that there are a lot of people around that may vie for their friendship, their companionship, but it's not going to stop there. Every one of us knows that, don't we? And so what we want to do is want to make sure we're in the world, but we're not going to be of the world if we're following God. And so we make the choice that we're going to be around those people who, if I do have trouble in my life, they're going to help me. I want to be around spiritual people that if I fall into error, Galatians 6 and verse 1, they want to restore me. They don't want to join me. They don't want me to join them in sin. They don't want to make it worse. They want to be the ones that are going to say, I want to help you. They're not going to beat you down. They're going to draw you up, help you to be that type of person that you should be. And whenever the times get hard, whenever the struggles get rough, they're not going to sell you out, but they're going to help you bear your burdens. That's the type of people that we need to surround ourselves with. Whenever young people get to the point, they get to transition from high school and get out, they've got a lot more freedoms. And the dangers are so very real. But, you know, amongst those people that I've dealt with through the years, including self, that have run into problems because of who they're with, the majority of them were older. Majority of them were those who, it was the ones in the workplace or such as that they began to hang around, and you got to work with them, but you don't have to make them your companions. And so make a wise choice on who it is. Life isn't fair. There are people who are going to be out to get you, who are going to try and manipulate you to get their own way. You got to be around those people, because that's the way so many people sadly are in the world, because they don't have God in their life. Try to find those people who do have God in their life. You know them now. Make them a vital part of your life. Don't let them go just because you reach some change in all of the aspects of your life, whether it be graduation, a new job, whatever it is. Make a wise choice in who you're surrounded with. And then, don't dig two graves. Now, some of you know what I'm getting at there already. There's a saying, it's, I think, an old Chinese proverb. Some people associate it with Confucius, others with any number of people who want to take credit for it. But it's, before you begin a journey of revenge, dig two graves. One of them's for yourself. In other words, that way of retribution, of trying to get even because somebody mistreated you. Life's not fair. People are going to treat you bad. But whenever that happens, you make a decision. I'm either going to let those people who I despise because what they did to me, I'm making a choice. Am I going to let them now control my life? A lot of people say, you know, this person ruined my life. They ruined this for me. They did this. So what are you going to do about it? I'm going to become like they were. I'm going to start acting like that. I'm going to try and get even and treat them badly. Well, isn't that what they did to you? So you don't go out. Don't dig two graves. Don't get on the road to revenge or get even. Or I'm going to, you know, I don't get mad, I get even. You'll need to live in control of what you do and how you ought to live. In spite of all that was done to Joseph, you need to look in that chapter and you think about, what kind of person was he? I mean, his own brothers had sold him into captivity. Now somebody bought him? I mean, how would that feel? We talk about slavery. I mean, that's just, how could that happen? It still happens in this world today. How can you treat me like a piece of merchandise? I mean, Joseph, he could have been an angry individual, just fighting and doing everything because you don't know what my family did to me. And then Potiphar, yeah, you act like you're going to trust him, but you bought me. Well, what did he do? You look and you find his master saw the Lord was with him, that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. Joseph found grace in his sight. He served him, made him overseer over his house, and all that he had put in his hand. And then in verse 6, Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. You see, what he did was the principle in Matthew the 5th chapter. There in verse 43, you know, you've heard it said, you know, you love those that love you, you hate your enemies. that's not the way that life ought to go. Sadly, that's the way so many in life treat others. But Jesus, he pointed out that if you only love those that love you and you despise those that treat you wrong, how are you different than them? Do not they the same? You see, these young men tonight who are graduating, the majority of us here tonight, we're children of God. We're to let a light shine. Not a light that I'm looking for somebody to get even with, but a light that I want you to see I'm different. Being a Christian means I belong to Christ. Being a member of the church means I'm called out. I'm not part of that anymore. And so I live a life that is different. I make the decision to be godly, not as the world. He could have turned around and said, you know, my brothers did this to me. I'm going to see what I can do to everybody else. Potiphar bought me. You wait and see what I do to people, how I treat people. But all through his life, he was known as a man who wouldn't be that way. Even whenever his brothers ended up coming to him as he had been raised to a period of a place of authority, he looked and he had some struggles with it. But he tested. He wanted to see what they were really like, and he ended up bringing his whole family to favor. I mean, you know, we make again the choice whether I'm in control of my life, letting God guide it, or the people who do evil to me, I let them control my life. The world's filled with people like that. The world needs people like you, me, who will do the right thing to people, who will treat them not as they treat me, but as I want to be treated, as the golden rule states in Matthew 7:12. It's my choice. In the end, temptations are real. Sometimes we look and we get this idea that temptations, that's something somebody else has. I'm above that. You know, it won't bother me. I can do this, I can go there, I can be around this. Not going to be anything. But the fact is, temptations are very real. God tells us in the book of James that we are drawn away of our own lust. We make the decision what to do with that. But he points out that that's a very real thing that happens. But sometimes they even come from those that you think you can trust. Here he is in Potiphar's house, safe place. He's been put in a position of authority. He's respected because he is a goodly person. Well, again, this is a reason to make sure that you choose the right companions, because somebody might get a little jealous or find something and try to bring you down with them. But the temptations are very real. In verses 7 through 10, you find it came to pass that after these things, that the master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph. Here's the master's wife. He's been put in charge of the house. He's been entrusted with things. So, I mean, surely she's going to have a proper regard for him. No. Here's this young man, and she cast her eyes upon him and said, lie with me. But he refused and said unto his master's wife, behold, my master knoweth not what it is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath in my hand. There's none greater in this house than I, neither has he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. In other words, he knows that this is not a proper relationship. He would never allow that. Why should I be involved in it? And he says, how can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And it came to pass as she spake to Joseph day by day, he hearkened not unto her. In other words, this is an ongoing thing. Seems like every time he gets around her, come on. But he hearkened not unto her to lie with her or to be with her. And you look and you realize then, temptations are real. But you know, Joseph was just a young man. He wasn't empowered with some kind of super shield that kept him from falling into temptation. But he was able to overcome the temptation and do right, no matter what the cost, no matter what it was. You look and you find further in verse 10 through 12, it says, it came to pass, she spake to Joseph day by day, hearkened not unto her to lie with her, to be with her. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business. There was none of the man in the house. She caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out. I mean, he's looking now and he says, I'm out of here. You know, he had resisted that temptation, resisted her advances. Now she grabs hold, come on. And he runs, leaves his coat behind. Now, this is just my supposition. I think he knew this is a bad situation. He's just a servant in that house, though he's been put over things. And here's this woman, she now has his coat, and she uses it. He talks about his attack against her, that he tried to force himself upon her. But he fled, no matter what the cost was going to be. He would rather have done that than chance getting into sin and saying, I can get away with it and I'll please her and maybe this will end. No, sin doesn't go away just because you think you'll engage in it for a while. Sin just grows. You can ask Achan about that. Don't take anything out of this city. He saw, he coveted, he took. I mean, if he hadn't cast his eyes upon her whenever he did, he said, okay, that's not mine, and stayed with it like Joseph had been fine. So many times we can do that. We need to realize the cost that is there. You know, do you want to? You know what it'll cost me if I don't give in to this? If I don't give in to this temptation, you get into the workplace. You think temptation isn't real? If you're going to advance, you got to do this. You got to play. You got to play along with us. You've got to be a part of the team. So you do things. Sometimes people justify it. Well, you know, it's the workplace. You got to do what you got to do. Joseph said, no, you don't. What you got to do is do the right thing, because it doesn't matter. You can retain your place in the house. You can retain your job. You can get ahead. But what if you lose your soul? How can I sin against God? That was his thought. You know, I can't do this. I have a relationship with God. I'm not going to have a relationship with you. And so make that decision. And then God will never. Now, I told you, you know, this world is unfair. There are people that sometimes, even those you suspect to be good, they ought to be on your side. They'll turn against you, and that's so disappointing. It's always terrible to have somebody that you trusted that will do something bad to you. And sometimes you can get a little jaded. You can get to the point that I don't care what I'm out for myself now. But we always need to realize God is there. You know, nobody cares, nobody wants to help. God is there. God will never leave you. He will always give you hope, and He will give a way of escape. You know, one of the things you can do, sometimes people have little memory things to help them. You know, whenever you get in despair, you know, everybody's doing this is getting so bad, everybody cheats here, everybody does this. Reach in your pocket, find a coin, and pull it out. And you'll read on there, in God we trust. Now, whether this nation trusts in God, there's a lot of questions on that one. But that phrase is something you keep in mind. Go through and read the Psalms about the trust that David had. But you look and you realize that God will never leave you. Whenever Joseph faced the selling of himself by his brothers, being bought into slavery, being deceived by this woman and lied against, being thrown into prison, there's one thing that was constant in his life. You find that as he went through life, that there was a way of living as he ought to be. You find in verse 2 through 3, the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man. He was in the house of his master, the Egyptian, and his master saw the Lord was with him. And that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. Not only did he know the Lord was with him, but it was evident. You know, in the book of Acts, the 17th chapter, you find, you know, here's the cry. Here come they that have turned the city upside down, turned the world upside down by preaching there's another king. That's our life. I mean, they ought to know that we've been there. They ought to know I'm different. If they don't, if we fit in, we need to back up and say, okay, this isn't going to work. I need to be distinctive. I need to let my light shine. I need to be that city that's set on a hill. I need to be the salt that influences rather than being influenced. I need to look and let the world know the Lord is on my side. The Lord is with me, and He is my hope. You find that the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and showed him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. Potiphar's wife now lied against him, and he's cast into prison. But even there, in the midst of that, he lived that just life that we talked about before. He didn't let that jade his actions. He was still who he ought to be, a servant of God. Keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in there. Whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. You know, James tells us that every good and perfect gift is from the Father above. Thank God. I mean, you go through, you face a struggle, you face a trial, you be the person that Joseph demonstrates we ought to be, and we make that choice. Then you sit back and you thank God that He's given me a way of escape. He's given me hope as an anchor of the soul. I'm able to live this life. You look and you find in Hebrews the 13th chapter, the writer emphasizes this: let your conversation, your life be without covetousness. Be content with such things you have. I mean, there it is. Am I going to go for everything in the world, or am I going to learn contentment? I'm not going to covet those things. I can have a good life. May be a prosperous life. May not be as prosperous as others. But I look and I can have that contentment because God has said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. So we can boldly say, now this is it. I mean, who's your helper in life? Who's the one you trust? Who's the one you lean on? Well, I could name a lot of people, large part of this congregation. I know that I can go to them just as we spoke of in Galatians, the 6th chapter. So many people ready to bear the burden. So many people ready to help me to be restored, to make me who I ought to be. But there's one who is above all, and that's God. He is my helper. So I'm not going to fear what man can do to me. If God be for us, who can be against us? The Apostle Paul himself, whenever he was in one of his imprisonments, said, not that I speak in respect of one, for I've learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. I know how to be abased. I know how to abound. In all things I'm instructed both to be full and to be hungry, to abound and to suffer need. How can you do that, Paul? Because I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me. Even whenever he faced his final imprisonment, he said, all men forsook me. Those that he thought he could trust, they forsook him. But he said, nevertheless, the Lord stood with me. So what shall we say to these things? And I mean, this is really what Joseph lived and what we can live. If God be for us, who can be against us? He goes on in the 8th chapter, and he says, we're more than conquerors through him that loved us. I mean, that's us. That's what Joseph was. And that's what we can be. So it's a choice that we make. The only one who can stand against me, these young men as they go out, every one of us as we face this life before us, the only one who can stand against me is me. But I must choose to be with God. Read Romans 8 sometime. See all the things that can't separate us from the love that's in God. And you'll find the only thing missing is me. You see, I can walk away from God, or I can live like Joseph and walk with God. Romans 8 in verse 1, as he talks about if God be for us, who can be against us? He emphasizes that these things are for those who are in Christ, who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. There's no condemnation to such people. Make the choice to be in Christ, to walk in Christ, and ultimately to die in Christ. What hope's all about. It makes a life that is so amazing. Joseph's life was so amazing. But you know what? I've known a lot of Josephs in my life that have overcome obstacles, overcome discouragement, overcome wrongs in their life. They continue to live faithfully. Some of them have passed from this life living faithfully. They chose to walk with God. If I don't do that, I make a choice as to what I'm going to do. I make a choice that I can walk with God, or I can remain out away from Him. Songs bring Christ your broken life. Sometimes we feel broken, but there's never anything that God cannot fix. But it's up to me to come to Him. We need to do that tonight in becoming a child of God or returning in faithfulness to Him. It's our choice as we stand and sing the song of invitation.